Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back. We've gotten together with this gentleman who helps people publish books, all different genres, children's books, fiction, self-help. Today, we're going to look at a book and author involving historical fiction. I'm talking about Mark Pogodzinski, who is the man behind NFB Publishing in Buffalo. He's brought along some company today. Mark, who do we have with us?
We have John Grandits, author, historical fiction. His latest, 1936, historical fiction piece set in Buffalo, tied to the rise of fascism and the beginnings of World War II.
Hey, John, welcome.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Steve. I appreciate it, sir.
I'm going to go out on a limb or not and surmise that you are a history buff, because as we speak on this Zoom, I'm looking in the background and there's a Revolutionary War portrait behind you. Who is that?
Actually, it's a Joshua Reynolds print. Unfortunately, it's not the original, but it's Captain Bligh of all people, from the book Men Against the Sea, about the takeover of his ship.
Wow.
He had quite a history, from what I understand.
So I want to talk about your history, using the word history as a catalyst here. I don't know your background. We're going to learn it today, but are you a teacher, history teacher?
No, but I always had an interest in it, and I took a lot of courses in it in college. My background is I was with the federal government. I was with the U.S. Department of the Treasury, and then I was in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security for the last few years of my career. But I've always had an interest in history, particularly World War II history, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners have that sort of interest too.
Yeah, it's when I look back at I'm fascinated looking at history, and even the 1700s. It's amazing what was accomplished. Let's look at your book, 1936. Basically, let's go with what the book is about, and then I want to dive into some of the premise, the story, and the whole background. So tell us overall, what's the novel about?
Well, when I started the novel, like I said, I've always had an interest in World War II history, and particularly the years before, when you saw the rise of Nazism and the rise of Hitler. And no doubt, that was probably the principal cause of that great conflagration that caused the death of 85 million people. So, but that evil ideology wasn't just confined to Germany. It had spread to a lot of other countries in Europe, principally Italy, Spain, Portugal. They all became fascist countries, and even the Vichy government, you can count them in there too. During World War II, the Vichy government in France. But it even resonated among elements of racist elements, anti-Semitic elements, nativist elements here in the United States, and especially among hate groups like the KKK, and then this new group, the German American Bund. And they professed that they were just going to promote good relations between the United States and Germany before the war. But obviously their real intention was to spread the Nazi government message within the United States. So after many years, I finally decided to write a book about this era. And I decided to focus it on ordinary people who took a stand against this sort of evil.
It must have been a challenge to create fiction based on history. I wouldn't even know where to start with that. Tell us about your journey there.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about the story. And I try to incorporate local history. There are events that took place in that era, in Buffalo, for instance, that could have implications in this story. And certainly there were events nationally that I brought into the story. But the story begins, the protagonist is a fellow by the name of Alex Wagner. And he's a son of a very wealthy family here in Buffalo at the time. And he's currently trying to find himself. And he's working as a journalist for a reporter for a German-American newspaper that's owned by a friend of his father. And he's also a big fan of jazz music at the time. And he goes to a dance hall where he meets this really dynamic young woman. Her name is Maureen Costello. And she's a teacher, but she's currently working at an aircraft plant, frankly, to make more money. They hit it off at this dance. Unfortunately, he has to leave early, so he invites her to join him on his assignment that evening, which was to cover the inaugural convention of the Bund that was taking place at the Statler Hotel in Buffalo that night. And actually, in doing the research on the book, I did discover that the Bund, in fact, held their inaugural convention in 1936 at the Statler Hotel in Buffalo. So I incorporated that into the story. Well, after covering the convention, they happened upon a gang of Nazis who were attacking a Jewish American news vendor a few blocks away from the hotel. With the help of a African American musician who was passing by at the time, they managed to thwart this attack and probably save this man's life. So eventually, Alex enlists Maureen and her grandfather, who's a retired police commissioner, in helping him with his series that he's doing for the paper on the Bund. And they help him in investigating and identifying this group of Nazi insurgents. In the course of pursuing the story, they make a discovery that could have national security implications. And with little or no help from official authorities, they rush to foil the scheme. So the story goes on from there, following an arc that includes espionage and terror, and family tensions and romance and betrayal and a quest for justice. So I think it's a good story. And I think that people will enjoy and find it interesting to read.
How much research did you put into this? Because so far, everything within Buffalo that you're mentioning sounds like it's historically accurate.
Well, I try to be. You have to put in I spent a lot of time at the Buffalo and Erie County Library, where they have a wonderful history department. And I also spent time at the Buffalo Historical Society to try and get information that would help me with the book. And I tried to incorporate personalities from Buffalo at that time. I mentioned, and you may know her from history, her name was Dorothy Parker. And she was from Buffalo, New York. She was born in a suburb, Lancaster, New York. And in the early 30s, she became a super journalist. And she was one of the first journalists in Germany, a foreign correspondent in Germany, that rang the alarm bells about the rise of Nazism and what a threat it was to the world. And she wrote, I think she was, at the time, she was a correspondent for the New York Herald Tribune at the time. And she wrote an article, and it became quite famous. It was called "I Saw Hitler." And she was really, obviously, quite critical of him. And at one point, she said he was the quintessential example of the little man. And everybody's familiar with that metaphor, the little man, And she said he was ignorant and graceless. And, she warned that he was leading his country and possibly the world into difficulties. So as soon as she issued that article, she was invited by the German government that she had to leave within 24 hours. And she returned home to the United States, really to sort of a hero's welcome. And she subsequently, her career, she was a model for a movie called Woman of the Year with Katharine Hepburn. And it was supposedly based on this woman. So it was fun incorporating her because obviously that conversation came up, Dorothy Parker and her warnings about Nazism in Germany. So that was fun. And that's always interesting. And it's wonderful when you can bring in different, in this case, different places that took place in Buffalo at that time. Principal among them, and I think it was kind of interesting, Buffalo in the 1930s was really an industrial juggernaut, even in the midst of the Great Depression. And you had Curtiss-Wright Aircraft Company, you might have heard of them, and Bell Aero Aircraft. They were another. Buffalo was sort of a Seattle, Washington of its time, these two huge aeronautical companies. And Curtiss-Wright principally made military aircraft, including this Helldiver. It was a naval dive bomber, and the Shrike. It was anti-personnel, a ground attack vehicle. But they're really the creme de la creme of their aircraft at this time in the book was the P-36. They called it the Hawk. And they eventually produced 1,000 of this aircraft at their big plant number 1 in Buffalo at the time. But it was interesting to juxtapose this industrial might that was taking place in Buffalo at the time with, they called it, it was an unfortunate term, they called it the hobo jungle. And really it was a camp for itinerant men who were riding the rails at that time. And there was actually a camp along along scrubland, along the Buffalo River that these men settled into and lived there for, in some cases, a number of years. So it was interesting to juxtapose the industry that was going on also with the hardship that was taking place in the Depression at that time. So I found that helpful in introducing that into this story.
You bring back a memory because as a kid, I'm pretty sure I did a model. You know, remember the Rebel models? I think it was the Hawk. I'm not even kidding. I did a few planes from the from right around World War II, the beginning thereof. Mark, when you got the manuscript or the details on John's book, what was your thought?
Having worked with John before, I knew it was very well researched, and the stories are always engaging. I do like historical fiction, mapping, as he said, personalities, fictional personalities on top of historical events. And I like the idea of fictional characters being historically accurate characters like Dorothy Parker, scenes in there. So I liked it. I liked it a lot, and I think it was an important book because, again, past is prologue. So we have to make sure that we understand the past so we can plan for the future. So I thought his book had a lot to say, even though it's historical fiction, it has a lot to say about modern times and what we can avoid and what we should avoid in terms of another world war, or based on certain aspects of our personality, our own biases, and how we can not avoid that, but understand it. And covering up the history is never the right idea. If you don't know where the scar came from, you don't know how to deal with it.
John, when you were writing the book, again, a lot of historical references. Scale of 1 to 10, 10 being every historical reference in the book is researched, to your knowledge, accurate. Yeah, that would be a 10. Or was it, let's say, 6, and then you improvised a little bit with the remaining amount? Where do you think you would be? Not that it matters. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I would say I'm probably at an 8 or 9.
Wow.
Obviously, for instance, when I was talking about the inaugural convention of the Bund, It took place in March of 1936, and in my book, it alludes to the fact that it was taking place during the summertime. So, you give yourself some latitude in regards to events such as that.
We all, I feel, have an affinity for a period of time. For me, mid 1800s, right when there was photography, loved looking at, I could say hours of those black and white photos and looking at the apparel. How did they do that? No machines per se, and like the clothes were amazing. I'm just looking at, some technology, but simpler way of life. That resonates for me. When you look at 1936 or that period there, what do you take away from it? What interests you? What inspires you? What piques your attention there?
I think people, considering, they certainly lived in much, much less affluent times that we do. But I think I got the impression that they lacked much of the cynicism that we do today.
Hmm.
And they were, even in the face of these difficulties, they were enthusiastic about their lives. They were very, very cognizant of creating, many of them were immigrants or sons of immigrants, and they were very, very consumed with providing a better life for their children and grandchildren. And they were hardworking. I mean, it was not an easy life at that time. Yet I think they pursued it with passion and with dedication.
I find it interesting you say that there was a lack of cynicism. Wonderful to hear that, but almost hard to fathom it in terms of what people were dealing with. Fascism, war, every depression, all of that going on, and they still weren't so cynical from your accounts. Pretty amazing, I would think, going through what they're going
Yeah,
through.
I think, you always hear the greatest generation. That was my dad's generation growing up during the Depression, and then, of course, during the World War II.
Yep.
And these people were remarkable, I think, and they should be. We should throw light upon who and what they were. I think one of the things that I did notice, there was probably, and this probably was part of the immigrant experience. For instance, in the city of Buffalo, you had different sections in town. The West Side, you had an Italian section of town. South Side, including the old First Ward, was the Irish part of town. African Americans were in the old Fruit Belt and the Michigan Avenue corridor. And Germans were on the east side, and everybody, including a very vibrant Jewish community, were in the north south towns. There was somewhat of a compartmentalization there, and I think, thankfully, we're more homogenized now. I don't think we're completely there, but especially on that ethnic level, I suspect you had, and I brought it up in the book. You did have somewhat more of a territoriality there, which I don't think you see today, but and I hope we don't. But you can't varnish over that. That was a part of the reality that existed at that time.
Wow. See, we forget about those things until you bring the attention to the history, the segregation of all these different ethnic groups. Yeah, I totally forgot about that.
I think a lot of it was, when people would come over, you would gravitate to people that you knew, and it was in many cases for your own protection, because there were a lot of forces, particularly nativist forces, who weren't particularly embracing of immigrants coming into this country. So you did have a tendency to group among your own people, your own church. You read oftentimes where, for instance, the Irish, they went into politics very, very heavily, and the ward bosses were the real leaders of their community. Also, in many cases, the religious leaders of those communities were very, very important in a leadership role. So obviously, you don't see that anymore. But I think you saw that back certainly at the turn of the century, but it was all part of that immigrant experience, I think.
And Mark, I want to throw it to you now. And I always, you do such amazing work in these novels, these books, right down to the cover. And many times I love art. I love graphics. It's all part of branding, and you also help market the products that you put out. This cover, very historical. It's got a sepia tone feel to it. It's got historic, what looks like photographs. I assume they're accurate to Boston, but I'm not really sure. So tell us.
Well, the photographs come from John, and they represent different parts of the book. You know,
Wow.
the aircraft, as you said, Buffalo at one time was a major aircraft manufacturing area. And then the march is actually in Buffalo. It's the Boone March, right, John?
Well, I couldn't get a photograph of the Boone March, but the Library of Congress, and you can see Steve might not have that level of detail, but the marchers, you clearly see a German Nazi flag mixed in with American flags, and that parade took place in, according to the Library of Congress, it took place in New York. I think on 86th or 87th Street in 1937. So obviously, as you alluded to earlier, I'm not completely accurate. It isn't 1936, it's 1937, and it isn't.
It's our secret. It's our
New York
secret.
City.
But
Wow.
he provided the images, and of course the Art Deco of the time was important.
Sure.
Especially like here in Buffalo, we have Frank Lloyd Wright house, the Darwin Martin house. So a lot of our architecture is Art Deco. The same man who designed Central Park in New York designed Delaware Park here in Buffalo. So at that time, Buffalo was a mini New York City in terms of architecture and in terms of design. And again, we wanted to make sure that we emphasize that with his cover. And again, make sure it's dated a little bit with the sepia, and
Sure.
then little tricks like that. But I think it turned out well, and hopefully it represented the book as best we could for John.
I get the vibe.
The last photograph there is, and I always like to mention this because it was such a brilliant idea. During the Depression, the Roosevelt administration started the Federal Art Project, and it was to keep artists and graphic artists being able to earn a living. And that last photograph is it's from the Federal Stage Shows, a division of the old WPA, Works Project Administration. And it does capture that idea because jazz and big band were a significant part of the story. And particularly in Buffalo, they had an area called the Michigan Avenue Jazz Strip. And I incorporated into the story. And it started with a jazz club. It was called the Little Harlem Hotel. Unfortunately, all these venues no longer exist, but there's certainly a record of them. And people like Dizzy Gillespie and Lena Horne and Duke Ellington, they would all show up at these jazz clubs on Michigan Avenue. And there's still quite a vibrant history and heritage in the Michigan Avenue African-American corridor on the east side that highlights this fantastic history.
What I love about that last photograph of the jazz combo, it's in shadow. You're not actually seeing, at least it appears from here, the actual figures. And you get the vibe, you get the feel. It's a combo jamming along. I can almost hear the music playing in my head from 1936. Amazing book, just the subject and the way you put it together. And there's just something also about the aircraft building aspect. I'm on Long Island. We had Grumman, we had Sperry Gyroscope, which built the gyroscopes that went into the planes. My dad actually worked there. He passed years ago. He would have been 96. It was all part of that. So I get that affinity for the aircraft design. 1936, a novel. You can find it all on the website, nfbpublishing.com. Anybody thinking about creating a book, doesn't matter who you are. If you have inspiration, you have an idea, Mark can help walk you through that journey right down to the cover. Both of you, Mark, John, great having you on today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, really, my pleasure, Steve. It was really great that you hosted me. I so appreciate it, sir.
I appreciate you both. Thanks a lot. And we will be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.